Welcome to the 2018 Candidates Forum brought to you by the Wallingford Community Women. I'm Jean McFarland, the program moderator. The program features the candidates running for state senator for the 34th Senatorial District. The format will be as follows. The first part of the program will consist of questions asked of the candidates by members of the local media, including the New Haven Register, Luther Trammell, and Record Journal, Lauren Tacores, and a student from Mark T. Sheehan High School, Gretchen Sipe. The second part will allow each candidate to make a closing statement. During the question and answer portion of the program, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. The opposing candidate will be allowed 1 minute for a comment. To conclude the program, each candidate will have 3 minutes to make closing remarks. The toss of a coin determined who has the first question, and that will be Len Fasano. Before starting the questioning, I'd like to introduce the candidates running for state senator in the 34th Senatorial District. They are Len Fasano, Republican, and Eiley McKean, Democrat. Mr. Trammell, will you please ask your first question of Mr. Fasano?
Good evening, Len. What's your position on tolls on Connecticut roads? And if you're opposed to implementing tolls, how would you go about paying for road improvements?
Luther, thank you for the question. I want to thank the Wallingford Community Women and Wallingford TV for putting on today's debate. So I am against tolls for a number of reasons. Real fast, in 1984, we made a deal with the federal government after there was a horrific car accident in Stratford that we would not put border tolls, and we would get rid of all tolls, as a matter of fact, every place. As a result of that, in that agreement, should we put up tolls in any place in Connecticut, we would have to pay back every dollar to the federal government that we received since 1983, 1984. So the only thing we could put up would be congestion tolls. There's no study and no evidence to suggest that would be a positive cash flow to the state. This would be electronically with the hoops. The last thing that was done talked about over 85 of these hoops. 95, 91, Route 8, Route 15, 84, Route 9, Route 8. So it goes on and on and on. And the bottom line is that cost you cannot get back. You're pickpocketing the taxpayers. We have a report called Prioritize Progress, no taxes, no tolls, make transportation a priority in the state, and use general obligation bonds. We would get $70 billion in 30 years, and that would pay for every project on the transportation agenda right now. No taxes, no tolls, no increases. This would just be making it a priority, and everything else gets funded.
Eiley McKean, would you please give a rebuttal?
So I do support tolls as a progressive structure, the way that Massachusetts does it, with an in-state Easy Pass having a low rate, an out-of-state Easy Pass having a slightly higher rate, and no Easy Pass a higher rate than that. I don't like the idea of congestion tolls. I think they're too unpredictable, and they target commuters especially hard. I think that that's probably one of the best ways to fund our transportation funding. I don't like the idea of general obligation bonds for that because those are slated for other things.
Gretchen Sipe, would you please ask the next question of Eiley McKean?
Are you in favor of legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes? Please explain why or why not, and what restrictions, if any, you would put on it.
I am in favor, and I would restrict it similar to alcohol and tobacco.
Mr. Fasano?
So real fast on the tolls, you can't do it the way Massachusetts does it because it violates federal law and the deal that we struck with them. So you either are in favor of congestion tolls or no tolls. You can't do what Massachusetts did. With respect to the recreational marijuana, I am against it for a bunch of reasons. One, by the federal government, you'd end up with a cash society for that business because no bank could have a deposit made in their bank. So any revenue would be dependent upon the honesty of the system. So it's not a revenue gain. And I don't think recreational marijuana wasn't going to be legal until we had a budget issue. And I don't believe the policy is there to do it. It's trying to do a money grab, and that's selling out our society. So I'm against it.
Thank you. Lauren Tacores, would you please ask the next question of Len Fasano?
Okay. Consultant Art Laffer, author of The Laffer Curve, has been engaged by Republican gubernatorial candidate Bob Stefanowski, who proposed the elimination of the state income tax, currently producing over half of the state's budget revenue. This, with higher sales and property taxes, are said to spur economic development and result in greater ultimate tax revenue. But in light of the fact that the state of Kansas nearly went bankrupt and had to abandon this plan after it was implemented there, and the fact that the federal deficit has now climbed to a record of over $790 billion due to such tax cuts, despite the raging economy, is this plan realistic in your view? How would the revenue loss be made up, or what drastic spending cuts would be in store?
So I have not read the Laffin report in any great detail at all. I think that Bob Stefanowski's plan is someone who aspires to reduce or eliminate the income tax. I think that's a noble vision to have for the state, because that will increase the business in this state. I think I'd rather have somebody who's a leader of the state who has a vision to reduce taxes as opposed to a leader who has talked about increasing taxes. So I'm not sure you could get there in the years that he has said, but I think the aspiration to do that is something that's going to keep people in the state and keep businesses in the state.
Eileen McKean?
So a couple of weeks ago at the Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Fasano said that he would be in favor of phasing out the income tax. So what I would wonder is how, after you get rid of the income tax, does economic development actually benefit the coffers of the state of Connecticut? When you're not collecting income tax, another thing that Mr. Stefanowski wants to get rid of is the business entity tax. Mm-hmm. If you're not taxing business and you're not taxing people's income, how does economic growth actually increase revenue? So I don't think it's real. I think that the income tax as a progressive tax is our most fair tax, and I would rather see us restructure our income tax and rely on it more and rely a lot less on regressive taxes like property taxes, sales tax.
Thank you. Luther Turmel, would you please ask the next question of Eileen McKean?
Eileen, what should the legislature be doing to improve the state's economic and business climate?
I think that there are a number of things that we can do to be a more business-friendly state. Once again, restructuring our tax code and investing in our cities, enabling our cities to become more vibrant cities. Definitely investing in education. I think that a few of the people ahead of us in the state rep thing actually said that we need to invest more in our colleges, which is true, but we need to diversify our workforce. We need a variety of people, a variety of skills, and going into from colleges to tech schools to vocational and apprenticeship programs is a great way to do that.
Mr. Fasano?
Thank you. So first, my opponent suggests that we need to tax more and then suggests that perhaps we need to tax less. So let me be clear. I think we need to have taxing less so we can get businesses and people to come to the state. I think what Sal Menzo has done here in Wallingford, where he has taken a curriculum that gets kids from high school won't want to go to college for a variety of reasons. The ability to get a high-paying job, at least out of high school, 50 and 60,000, and then work their way up from there, is a way to get businesses that are looking for this type of talent. And you hear businesses searching for kids who have manufacturing skills. Sal Menzo's plan has got to be incorporated, I think, statewide. I think it's a terrific plan. I think we need to get to our inner city and do a better job at the education by giving them skill sets that if they don't want to go to college, they have an opportunity to get into a job. Your cell phone breaks, you look for a kid under the age of 20 to fix it.
Thank you. Gretchen Sight, would you please ask the next question of Len Fasano?
What specific proposals do you have to make our state and communities more energy efficient? Would you support more green technology or return to nuclear power as a possible solution?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part. You said more what? Apologize.
What specific proposals do you have to make our state and community more energy efficient? Would you support more green technology or return to nuclear power as a possible solution?
Well, I think that recently there was a big battle with respect to nuclear power, and the governor acquiesced and has now agreed that part of the non-carbon emission can include nuclear power. And I think that will drive electric costs down and save the environment in that regard. And we have to make decisions. Using solar and wind power drives up electrical costs, and people are having a tough time paying the bills as it is. But there has to be a movement towards that direction. I get that. And as the technology gets more refined and it's cost efficient, I think we should move in that direction.
Eileen McKean.
I think that there's a tremendous area of growth in green energy, especially solar and wind, and that will create jobs and improve our economy if we invest in it correctly. We have a big wind project coming in Long Island Sound, which is supposed to begin in 5 years. So we're already moving in that direction. I don't think that reinvesting in new nuclear is that great an idea, but I support keeping Millstone open until we have another clean replacement for it.
Lauren Takoras, would you please ask the next question of Eileen McKean?
Yes, coming back to creating a strong workforce, business is astounded at the apparent lack of coordination between education, workforce agencies, and businesses. Availability of a skilled workforce is a major challenge to the manufacturing sector, and we may lose jobs to other states if we don't find a way to provide it. How would you restructure state government to ensure a better pipeline for training for the actual jobs needed?
So when I've talked to people in the business, what they're looking for are young people who are able to learn, not necessarily already know the job that they're looking to fill. So I think that if our education is adaptive and relevant and really exercises the brain in a scientific manner, then we can enable our young people to think and problem solve and learn, that they'll be able to pick up these jobs, they'll be trained on the job. I personally didn't begin my career knowing the job that I entered. And every time I've changed career, I didn't actually know the job before I got one. I always had on-the-job training. My daughter is a union carpenter. She had a 4-year apprentice program. My husband went through an apprentice program. My dad was a machinist. He was recruited to work at Pratt & Whitney. No skills already. So I think that expecting our kids to just fit right in is not realistic. And I don't think industry actually is looking for that anyway.
Mr. Fasano.
Thank you. So I go back and talk about the Sal Menzo issue. I think that is important to teach a trade. I was talking to some pastors in Hartford who were saying you have to teach manufacturing issues and get them interested in the 4th grade, because by the 9th grade we've lost those kids to crime because they don't see college as a viable option. So I think we need to do that in our cities and introduce the kids to the manufacturing. As I said when I ran out of time, if you have a phone and it doesn't work, you find someone at the age of 20 and say, fix it. And they do. They have the affinity for that. And we can get our workforce, our young kids to do it, particularly in our cities. And that's a bridge that we have to cover and get done.
Luther, would you please ask the next question of Len Fasano?
Len, should the legislature consider legalizing sports betting?
One, we should consider it. And the only reason why it wasn't done is Republicans and Democrats who met with the governor did not want the governor negotiating the deal. It gets complicated because of the pact that we have with the tribes. We have to go through them, and they kind of are the quarterbacking of this to some extent because of the deal we have with them. So when all the leaders got together, we met with the governor. Money is a big issue, revenue stream, and then what type of betting? They call it exotic betting, where you're able to bet, is the next pitch a ball or strike? Is the guy going to throw an interception in the third quarter? Things like that is something that I think we cannot do statewide, but maybe the tribes can. So I think we should have a conversation, whether we get there or not, I'm not sure. But I think there was a understanding among leadership that the new governor and the new legislature should be the ones negotiating the deal, not the old legislature or the governor. So we came in July, and that's when we decided we need to put this on hold and look at it again in January. So I think there will be conversations. Where that ends up, I'm not exactly sure.
Eileen?
I will say I have an open mind on the subject, and obviously Len's already worked on that, and I'm willing to learn more about it.
Thank you. Gretchen, would you please ask the next question of Eileen McKean?
Tobacco and nicotine and other substances have become a huge problem within schools through vaping. Is there anything the state legislator that you can do to prevent underage children from obtaining these substances?
I think that vaping needs to be regulated the same as tobacco and alcohol. And as Representative Lenahan said earlier, we need to restrict how vaping is marketed toward young people and youth and children.
Mr. Fasano?
I think at that point, we're identical in nature with respect to that. I think it should be regulated. You go to the gasoline station, that's all you see is when you walk in and pay are all those varieties and what's in them, and I have grave concerns over that. So I think we should regulate it even more than what we're doing. I agree.
Lauren, would you please ask the next question of Mr. Fasano?
Okay. If Connecticut repeals the state income tax and becomes more reliant on sales and property taxes for revenue, how would you go about diversifying local revenues under a no income tax system? Would you support municipalities having the ability to levy an additional local sales tax?
So if the presumption of the question is they got rid of the personal income tax, which
The state income tax.
state income tax, it would be an issue. I think that municipalities, to some extent, should have the right, if we start doing a change that results in property taxes going up, people can't afford that. So it's like a balloon. If you're going to push on one side, you got to give some room on the other. My concern has been, and I've been vocal in the paper with respect to New Haven, is what's happening with this money, particularly in the bigger cities. 39% of their budget comes from all of us in this room, and I think we need to know how they're using that money. But I think you cannot raise property taxes, so you have to look at something else based upon the presumption of your question. You have to look at something else. Otherwise, property taxes have to go up, and people just can't afford the increase in property taxes. But I think the other part of that equation is we need to get a better handle on how cities, especially if they're getting 39% of our budget, spend the money.
Eileen?
No, I'm not a fan of having towns and cities have their own income tax, their own sales tax. I think that creates a competition, a race to the bottom, basically, for municipalities and towns. Going back to what cities do with quote-unquote our money, when you have a city that has a large portion of its real estate untaxable, such as through municipal buildings, state buildings, universities, and hospitals, I think that when we give them some money in lieu of those taxes, that's where we go. I mean, we don't go to the hospital here in Wallingford, we don't go to the hospital in North Haven, we don't go to the hospital in East Haven, we go to New Haven or we go to Meriden.
Luther, would you please ask the next question of Eileen McKean?
Eileen, how would you go about reducing the state's budget deficits?
So I think there's a number of ways that we can look for waste and inefficiency in our government. We used to actually have a group of people who sought out these inefficiencies and to save money through minor cuts in the budget. And they were phased out over a period of a few years, even though they more than earned their own income in savings. I think that there's a rule that I keep hearing about that if a state agency doesn't spend its full budget at the end of a fiscal year, then it gets cut the following year. That incentivizes waste. We need to remove that. We also need to, there's only so much you can cut your budget before you really have to look at revenue increase. And I think that our budget and our tax code really need to reflect our values.
Mr. Fasano?
So I think there are 4 things we could do immediately. UConn Medical is something that we have to force them to partner with somebody. Right now, it costs $305,000 per medical student cost. And we subsidize a lot of that. We have to get them to partner with somebody. Number 2, we got to think of privatizing some of our services. Our social services, for example, Connecticut is one of the few states that provide both state and private providers. Private providers do it cheaper and better and more quality. We need to move some of those services over and save that money. We need to privatize some of the services at DMV. So those are the 3 or 4 things we could do immediately to start to get a hold of this budget deficit.
Gretchen, would you please ask the next question of Mr. Fasano?
So, over the past few years, state universities have been receiving less funding from the state, which has required tuitions to go up by about 5%. How can you help lower the cost for students like me planning to enter college in the next few years?
So I think one way of lowering the cost is we have to put more pressure on UConn. UConn, when we were having budget deficits, UConn was raising salaries at the administrative level 5% in many cases. UConn doesn't feel that they have to be fiscally responsible to the public, and they do. It's a great institution. We're proud of the institution, but I think we need to get a better handle on their finances. They go up on all this, on the wages and benefits and the other stuff that they go up on, and then they expect our kids to pay for it. And what's happening is some kids in Connecticut are going to state schools outside of Connecticut because it's less expensive than UConn. I talked about UConn Medical, for example. There was a professor for 9 months had been passed away because his wife had killed him, and for 9 months we paid that salary while she hid the body in the closet. But for 9 months, no one knew he was in, but we continued to pay him. That just shows there's a lack of review and oversight at so many levels. And we need to get a hold of them and say, you need to tighten up your budget because our kids are paying for it. Education is important, but we need to make sure we're doing the right thing with our money.
Eileen McKean?
So we do absolutely need oversight. I really believe that UConn Medical in particular turns out some of the best doctors in our country. But how do you feel about basketball? Because if you're looking at like somebody who makes a lot of money, I'm not really a fan of celebrity coaches. And I am a coach. But I think that we really need to assess our state budget, and I think that we need to fund our schools.
Lauren, would you please ask the next question of Eileen McKean?
Small business is particularly affected by mandates, taxes, and increasing expenses, and generally the largest expenditure for a small business is wages. Minimum wage went to $10.10 an hour in 2017, and there have been proposals to increase it to $15 an hour. Would you support a further increase, and should it be indexed with inflation?
I do support an increase. I do think it should be indexed to inflation. I believe that small businesses in particular would benefit from having a higher minimum wage. A lot of small businesses already treat their employees well, and they do it because they value those employees on a personal level. Also, turnover is very expensive, especially for a small business. Every time they have to hire and retrain somebody else, it costs money. I really feel that enabling our small businesses to thrive in our state means we need to look at how we tax small businesses and how we treat large businesses. A lot of large businesses get the tax breaks that they don't really need or deserve, and enabling small business to stay in Connecticut or start in Connecticut, through small business loans, low interest small business loans, which was a program that was cut in the last budget, would help insulate our society better. When Alexion moved out and they took their couple thousand jobs, that really hurt the economy in New Haven. Whereas if you have a lot of small businesses and say somebody goes out of business, it may be 10 people who lose their jobs, but they can be reabsorbed into the system much faster because there's more options for employment. I'm a big fan of a locavore economy. And when you pay people better, they'll use services more, they're able to afford higher quality goods and services, and that actually increases the overall economy and flow for everybody. So paying the lowest paid people more, will have everybody making more in the long run.
Mr. Fasano?
So I have voted for a wage increase of minimum wage when the economy was very healthy. I have done that. When the economy is the way it's been for the last 12 years or 13 years, I have not been of that thinking. I run a couple small businesses. One small business, I hire a lot of kids during the summer. It's a seasonal business. When the minimum wage went up, and I can't raise costs, I had to not hire as many kids. That's just what happens. I think it should be indexed to inflation. That was a notion that was rejected by the Democratic majority when we put it up as a bill. Number two, I think there should be a minimum wage for maybe introductory kids, 16, 17, 18. But when you have folks of a certain age who do have family and other obligations, I think there should be a separate minimum wage so that it's not an introductory job. But without the minimum wage as an introductory job, I would argue a lot of these kids won't get jobs. And I think that's important.
Luther, would you please ask the next question of Mr. Fasano?
Len, where do you stand on the use of economic incentives to try and attract companies to our state?
Well, Governor Malloy did his first 5, which I think went up to the first 30 or something, right? And I think one of the problems is that the way he did it, there was not thorough checks. There was a rush to give out the money. There were promises made by companies, they left, and there was no way to take hold of those promises and get the money back. I think you do have to talk to companies, but it can't be a widespread program. I think I'd like to see more incentives for our smaller and medium-sized businesses that are here. You look at GE. Governor Malloy gave GE a very good package. GE didn't leave because of talent. They didn't leave because of taxes. And I met with the CFO, so I know why they left. They left because our pension liability was too high, and we weren't doing anything to do that, to fix that. And they knew sooner or later that was going to be a problem. That's what they said to me in a room. So, I think we need to make a business-friendly environment, and people will come. I think for big businesses, you may want to give them some breaks here and there, but not the way the Governor Malloy did.
Eileen McKean?
I think that every package needs to be looked at individually. And for the most part, I agree with Len that a lot of what we've done in the past hasn't worked.
Gretchen, would you please ask the next question of Eileen McKean?
The state of Connecticut has pension obligations that are underfunded and in danger of not being able to pay its retirees in the future. What do you propose to do to remedy this situation?
Thank you, Gretchen. That's a tough one. The state employees' pension has a 30-year plan to bring it back up to a sustainable level. And we need to do something similar with the teachers' plan. We can't do exactly the same thing because some time ago we took out a $20 million, basically a loan to shore up that fund, and our contract with Wall Street has limitations on what we can do with it. The bottom line is that we've cheated. From 1939 to 2007, we cheated teachers and state workers out of part of their pay when we didn't pay their pension up what we were obligated to pay for their pensions. That was part of their wage package. We can't change the rules about that in the middle of the game, and we have to just, for better words, suck it up and pay the bill.
Mr. Fasano?
Thank you. We have done some things that have been better, and I will give credit where credit is due to Governor Malloy, who said we're going to pay the actuarial figure from now on. And he was right to say that, and we have done that. We did do some work a couple years back under REL. We borrowed some money to put some money into the teacher's pension account. We did this year, in a bipartisan budget, pay the 33% required for the teacher's health care. But we have to figure out a plan to start chipping away at this debt. We have a 10-year contract, so we're stuck to 2027. But future state employees, not past, we may have to think of something different, but then still make the full payment to the pension plans because we have to deal with that problem. It is unfair that workers put that money away, or we were supposed to, and we didn't. They should not be cheated out of that benefit. We need to uphold our promises.
Lauren, would you please ask the next question of Mr. Fasano?
All right. In the past few rounds of budget cuts, the elections, FOI, and ethics budgets were all cut. These program review functions are the watchdog agencies to help keep government honest and on track. Does it make sense to cut here? Is it wise in your view to not have such oversight?
So budgets are priorities, and we are in deficit. The question is, are we going to cut social services? Are we going to cut education? Are we going to cut municipalities? Where are we going to cut to get to where we have to be? And this bipartisan budget, and I might add, it's the first time in Connecticut history we had back-to-back bipartisan budgets, came at us talking at a table, what's the best way to achieve that end? And we looked at all those issues, including SEEP, for instance, and we made some changes to SEEP, not only to their budget, but also to how much money we get for elections. We reduced that a little bit. So these are just decisions you have to make. In the scope of things, bipartisanly, both sides believed it made more sense to do a little bit of cuts at these different areas, not only those areas, but others, so we could keep our social services, our education funding, and our municipal funding.
Eileen McKean?
So I've stated before that our budget needs to reflect our values, and I really feel that the process of politics as the art and science of actually electing people, is one of the greatest points in our current structure where corruption can happen, and taking money away from SEEK and cutting their budget is not the way, cutting their oversight is not the way to go about it. I have no problem with reducing the amount of the grants or changing the things that we've had to do to both qualify for CEP, but we really need those attorneys to be able to watch over us and everybody in the whole system and to do audits where it's needed. So I didn't think that that was a good place to cut.
Thank you. Luther, would you please ask the last question of the evening to Eileen McKean?
Eileen, would you support asking the state's labor unions to reopen their contracts and seek some kind of givebacks from them?
They've already been negotiated in good faith. We've had the opportunity to make changes to labor contracts, and I do not think that these contracts need to be reopened until their due date.
I think that Ned Lamont and Bob Stefanowski both said that they would, it's not our call, would be the gubernatorial call. I think they both said that they would have the unions in to have a conversation about it. I think it's worth a conversation. Governor Malloy made a 10-year deal which passed strictly on party lines, with Lieutenant Governor breaking the tie in the state Senate. But I think that that's going to be a gubernatorial call. I think the conversation must be made. Maybe it's not going to happen, but asking doesn't hurt anything. So I think, but both candidates have said, Republican and Democrat, that that conversation needs to take place, at least to discuss it. So I suspect it will, no matter who wins.
Thank you. That concludes the question and answer portion of the program. Each candidate will now have 3 minutes to make a closing statement. Mr. Fasano, would you please begin?
Sure. First of all, I would like to thank the Wallingford community women as well as Wallingford TV for the debate tonight. I'd also like to thank the people of the 34th District for the support they've shown me over the years. It's been an honor to serve this district. You know, this year we were 18-18 in the state Senate, and the argument was that the state Senate would not be a functional chamber because it being 18-18 and the divisiveness out there in politics, nothing would go forward. Well, Senator Looney and I said that isn't the way it's going to work. And we managed to put something together that made the state Senate a very functional place. I would add, it ended up being the kickoff for both the two bipartisan budgets that were passed in 17 and 18 back to back, the first time in Connecticut's history. And I think that's important. Politics has turned divisive. There's mean language, there's lies, misrepresentations. We don't need that in politics. What we need is bipartisanship and conversations. And as leader of the state Senate on the Republican side, we have shown that ability. We passed the protection of the Affordable Care Act. We passed equal pay. We passed that pregnancy is a qualifying event for the Affordable Care Act. We have done a number of bipartisan initiatives purely because they're conversations. I was at a show earlier today and they said, why did the first budget take 7 months to pass? And the answer was, we had conversations between leaders and politics that never happened before in that building. We got to, why do you believe this is important? And we found out that we had more commonality than dislikes or disagreements. That's why the second budget in 2018 took 35 days. And reporters said, if you took 117 to do the first, how could you do it in 35 days? Because we understood each other's opinion. That never has happened in that building for as long as I've been in that building. That was refreshing. That's what makes Connecticut different. And that's why I'm proud to be the leader of the Republican State Senate. And I hope that I ask for your support in this November election. Thank you so much.
Eileen McKean.
So I've been an activist for almost 20 years, and I've spent a lot of time up in the LOB, the Legislative Office Building. I take a few days off every year, go up and testify on bills I care about, and I've watched the process. I've seen how it works and how it doesn't work, and Len is right. There is actually a lot more cooperation in our state capitol than there is in the federal government. 94% of the bills that passed did so with bipartisan support. So I am not by any means saying that I wouldn't work across the aisle. I really think that a good idea is a good idea, and I don't care who introduces it. What I really want to do, and some of the things that I've done in the past as a mother and a Girl Scout leader and a volunteer in various groups, is to do a lot of conflict resolution. And in Girl Scouts, we said, let's come back to the promise and the law and focus on how best to serve the girls. And I think that we can do that up in the Capitol and say, let's come back to, the Constitution and say, how can we best serve the people in Connecticut? And I think that is the way to move forward in this state. And I would really like to have the opportunity to serve working people in this district. I think that we need a diverse body. Our government was designed to work with a diverse body of ordinary people, not just attorneys, not just men, and not just people who've been up there a long time. People wonder how much experience I have. I've got a good deal of experience, and I've probably actually got more experience than Len had 16 years ago. So I ask for your support November 6th.
Thank you. This concludes the senatorial district portion of the 2018 Candidates Forum. On behalf of the Wallingford Community Women, I thank you for watching and remind you to please vote on November 6th.